Hello, everybody, wherever you may be. Welcome to another live episode of with yours truly, Wednesday Night Live, Simon Jacobson. And being that this weekend is the holiday of Shavuos, 3,328 years ago, all our souls and our ancestors stood at this monumental, historic event in the Sinai desert and received what can be called the most revolutionary event in all of history. Because in fact, even though initially it was a Jewish experience, the Talmud does say that the entire world sensed that something was happening, because a silence, an eerie silence, engulfed the entire globe. It says birds did not chirp, the wind stopped blowing, everything was quiet. And when the nations of the world came to Bilam, who was the prophet, their prophet, and said, "What's happening?" He said, "Hashem, God is giving His Torah, is giving His strength to His people." So this is a nice Talmud, but in fact, if you turn the clock forward now 3,328 years since that event, the Bible has become the biggest best-selling book in all of history, with more Bibles being sold a year than all the bestsellers combined. Billions of Bibles have sold. So that gets people's attention when it's monetized, when it's commercial. That's not my point, obviously. My point is that 4 billion people on this planet see the Bible, see the Torah, and therefore Sinai as their great moment as well. When you have 2.5 billion Christians, 1.8 billion Muslims, and a few Jews, comparatively 14 million. Minuscule. But it's the 14 million that began the whole thing, and it has reached more than half the planet. And it's an amazing historical fact. And we can stand proud because we were the ones, we as the Jewish people stood at Sinai. And Sinai gave us that moral code that is the bedrock of civilization today. There's an excellent book called On Two Wings. I cite it quite often, by a scholar named Michael Novak. And he makes the case, not as an argument, but actually with documentation from the founding fathers of the United States. And that's not a small matter, because remember, the United States is the first institutionalized democracy. Up until the French-American Revolution, who ruled the world? Monarchs, the church, individuals. That's how it's been from the beginning of time. And it's only 300 years ago, approximately 1776 would be how long? Actually, we're now in 2016. Okay, 1976 was 200 years. So another 250 years ago, which is really so small in the scheme of things, is when the first institution established a country based on freedom. You read the Declaration of Independence. And in his book, it's well worth reading. It's more academic, but it is really more documentation of letters, correspondence, and documents from the founding fathers, Adams, Jefferson, Madison, Paine, and so on, who all based, and this is the way he puts it, based the system on the metaphysics of Torah. He doesn't even use Bible. And he's not a Jewish writer. So it just demonstrates something that very few people know, that the world today that we know is a free world with a guarantee of human rights is not a given. This was not the story of history. The only ones that embraced that were the Jews, who always embraced the idea from the beginning of time, what the Bible says, that all the human beings created in the divine image. The founding fathers rephrased it into the Declaration of Independence and say all men are created equal and are endowed by the Creator with inalienable rights, pursuit of happiness, liberty, and so on. And then, of course, this is the basis of the Bill of Rights. Freedom of speech, freedom of free press. And we take it for granted because most of us, if not all of us, were born in this freedom. So we think this is the way it was always. It wasn't. And you can attribute it and credit it to Shavuos. So if someone ever asks you why is Shavuos important, or why is Judaism for that matter important, because it really gave the human race civilization. Civilization is based on human rights. Without that, you have dog eats dog, and whoever is more powerful wins, as we see the story of history. Even with these rights, we still have conflict and we still have war, unfortunately. But at least we have an institutional argument, and we have ability to defend ourselves, Jews or any minority, based on simple one thing: our rights. Our right to exist, our right to pursue and seek the religion of choice, education of choice, and all the other rights that we're given. And I think it's important to acknowledge that this is due to the event 3,328 years ago, and now has become a viable reality in most of the world, and it continues to grow. There's an organization called Freedom House, where they document the free countries versus so-called the non-free countries in the world, and you'll see a trajectory that the world is getting freer and freer. There's still countries that don't guarantee these freedoms, but they're becoming fewer and fewer, and the trend is in this direction. This doesn't mean we have perfection. We didn't have perfection 3,328 years ago as well, but it means there's a trend that is very hopeful, and it demonstrates something extremely important. I just wanted to state that because we're going into this holiday, and people think it's about eating blintzes or cheesecake, which is nice, and lasagna and other dairy, whatever it is that people make. But there's something bigger happening, and that is that we are commemorating, actually recreating events that happened back then. And there's a lot to be said about it. And I've talked about the theme many different years, different aspects of Shavuos and the holiday and its universal messages, including the messages of the way the Jews received the Torah, the way they embraced it, and how things unfolded as a result. But I want to talk about, in this pre-Shavuos workshop, we'll call it, how high can you reach? I thought it's appropriate also to talk about something even more than just the moral code which Sinai gave us. We'll talk about also on a personal level. You say, okay, fine, that's on an institutional level, on a global level, on a political level, rights and freedoms, which obviously affects us all. But I want to speak about it a little more on a personal level. A personal level, which is the irony of all ironies that I've always pointed out, that with all this freedom, in many ways we feel more enslaved than our ancestors did. They may have been in the bondage of Egypt or under other empire rule, under the rule and oppression of other empires. But today, we don't have that, but we have internal. There's never been as much psychological oppression and psychological fears, inhibitions. And just look at the amount of therapy people go to. We don't even have statistics for this, but how much of our minds and our hearts are occupied by haunting thoughts, the thoughts of whatever it is that happened in our childhoods, our own inner fears, whether they're real or imagined, sexual stuff that in a way did not exist when people were struggling simply to survive. They didn't have the leisure and time to sit around and say, am I a happy person or not? As soon as we start asking that question, and especially when you have some boredom thrown into the picture, and then we have all these alternatives, all these options that are all short-term, like sugar, instant gratification. You ask most young Americans, or most older Americans for that matter, if they give you the top 5 things that they're passionate about, it'll probably be included the following: sex, money, sports, maybe celebrities, movies, and some other item of leisure, which, if you think about it, is very interesting. Now, one of those things has permanence. Now, one of those things includes the word truth. Now, one of those things includes the word soul. Now, one of those things includes anything that lasts forever. It's like 5 different types of candies. Now, I'm not saying that behind sexuality or money and other things, there's a lot of power and it could be channeled into great things. But the reason that we choose those top 5 is because we live in a society where we are essentially, we have a lot of free time, a lot of leisure, and we have the luxury to just enjoy ourselves. And people are into that mode. Now, I'm all for enjoyment and pleasure. However, it shouldn't surprise us why life is so not meaningless to so many. It's not a surprise when people say, what's the meaning of it all? What's the purpose of it all? Does it even matter? Who really cares? How often do you hear people say, who really cares? Does it make a difference? I behave this way, that way. So many people out there. Everybody's taking care of their own needs. Why shouldn't I just fit into it? And it takes an element of, I would say, even courage and integrity. This is another word I'm looking for. Certain inner strength to really say I'm going to do something with my life that will have some impact. Now we all know that when we help somebody, or we do something soulful, or something meaningful, or something giving, it definitely gives us a much far more deeper level of contentment than anything that's short term. But the fact of the matter is we constantly gravitate to the lowest common denominator because it's the easiest. And unless we're compelled, we will always choose the easiest route. And the easiest route, frankly, is not going to be something that we're necessarily going to be very proud of. Because if you take all those items I just mentioned, I just gave those options, you will also find that 10 years from now, and someone looks back and say, okay, so what do you think about the 5 things that you value so much? They say, well, I keep pursuing it and it doesn't necessarily satisfy me. That's what ends up happening because it's like it is with sugar. Coca-Cola, right? You like Coca-Cola. Some people like Diet Coke. And the debate goes on. Someone's drinking Diet Coke. The guy that likes regular Coke says, how could you drink Diet Coke? It's like fake. It's the fake thing. As if like real Coke is the real thing, which is what they call it, the real thing. That's our society. Reality TV. You want some reality? I'll sell it to you. No problem. What about reality? Real reality is not games and not anything. Real reality is, find yourself a spouse and get married and you'll find out what reality is. Now, that's too unpredictable. I'm not in control. There's other things going on. I want a reality like my soap opera. I want a script. I want it to be a little surprising, but I don't want to have to pay the consequences. Let someone else. So we live vicariously through characters, which is why film and music and art and celebrities and all that played such dominant role in our lives, because it's replacing really personal responsibility. And I find myself when I talk about this sometimes, actually people coming to this class or watching online usually are here because they are thinking about these matters. They're not coming here to get real estate tips or what television show to watch tonight, So, as a matter of fact, a number of years ago, now it's less, I guess, because people watch it online. But I remember I used to start seeing, I saw a lot of times new people coming, and they always brought their so-called somebody they were coming with, a partner or a dating partner. And after a while, I figured out that a lot of people brought their dates here to this class, because that was a very good way to find out what that person is about, because my class is not neutral, and they want to see if that person will respond. So men bringing women and women bringing men. And people told me that was great. After the class, I have a conversation. I see whether, instead of me having to be provocative, they just have to react to you. And I learn a lot about a person. So, I don't know, we never marketed the class that way. Perfect place to bring your date to find out more about her or him. But that was something which I found interesting. So let's talk about the positive side of things. The fact of the matter is I don't have to remind any of you how miserable you may be or how lonely or how things aren't working, or internally or externally. And I'm not here just to talk about, obviously, only misery. Even if you feel you're happy, the fact of the matter, life is complicated. And when it comes to the real deeper, as I said, the real things that matter. Because if you ask that same person, give me the top list of 5 things that are really important, not what you do and what you want to do. The most important things that, hypothetically, cerebrally, no one's going to say those 5 things. People will actually be embarrassed to say those 5. There they'll say family, love, God, ethical integrity, whether we live up to this or not. So there's a big disparity, you can say a dissonance between what we see as being values and what our values actually are. Or better put, not what our values are, where we spend our time. And I think we are in some ways all victims of a society and its blessings, the blessings of freedom. And I've quoted this statistic a number of times because I just think it's a tremendous way of capturing the state of affairs of our time. So Alan Rickover, Admiral Alan, what's his name? I always forget his first name. Alan, I think Alan. Anyway, Rickover is definitely the last name. He's an admiral who reached in the Navy, U.S. Navy, the highest. There's no 5 stars. There's 4-star is the highest level you can reach. He came from the Eastern Europe, Jewish guy, and grew and rose in status until he became what some call the father of the nuclear navy, because he really took the U.S. Navy and turned it into a modern machine. So he's given that credit and considered very forward-thinking, progressive, visionary. So he gave a talk in 1955 where he compared a statistic, the last century, from 1855 to 1955. And this was the statistic, listen to this, that in 1855, around 90% of energy generated in the world was generated through human effort, through humans. And in 1955, 90% of energy generated in the world is generated through machines. Now, this is not a small difference, because in 1855, which was the outset of the Industrial Revolution, most energy, for example, if you needed food, you either had, in an agrarian agricultural society, you need to either have your own farm or work on a farm, and you worked all day in the heat of the sun to yield a sack of potatoes or rice or whatever it was, and you traded the rest. It was human effort. There were very few machines. All the harvesters and the turbine engines and all that didn't exist yet. And in 1955, by then, we turned machines do the job. So of course the simple question is, what happened to all the time? You no longer have to work 8 hours in the field and be exhausted. Remember, 8 hours in the field means that you're exhausted. By the time you get home and eat dinner, you don't have time for anything else. What happened with all the time? So he explained two things happened. There was the birth of so-called a tremendous amount of time was freed, which is why we have an industry called leisure. There was no leisure back then. Yes, people did some things, weekends and so on, but they didn't have a lot of time. And number two, the amount of wealth that wealthy people made became obscenely high, because now those that control the buttons didn't just make a little money, they made tremendous amounts of wealth. Now, he didn't take it into the moral sphere, but I will, and I think this tells you a lot about how things changed. So on one hand, it's a great blessing. Look how much time we have. But it's always, every blessing comes with a big challenge. What happens if you don't know how to use the time? There were the amount of addictions that we have today, whether it's gambling, whether it's drugs, whether it's alcohol, whether it's sex addictions, or other addictions, simply didn't exist back then. That doesn't mean that people were tzaddikim and perfect people. It's just because of the time and the effort that was invested in life, it didn't exist. So we live in a very different type of world. And we're not turning the clock back. The thing is, how do you infuse in people a sense of purpose when we have so much comfort and comfort zones? Now, of course, many of you may complain, say, I'm not so comfortable. I wish I could have some more money to pay my bills. I wish I didn't have to struggle with this, struggle with that. But if you compare it to then, it's not even comparable. So I thought that an appropriate way to address Shavuos, Sinai, is this context, and calling the topic, how high can you reach? How high can you reach? Because I also find an interesting phenomenon which really is almost disturbing. When you ask people, whatever age it may be, I'm not talking about young kids, we're talking about people already adults, and you say, do you feel you're living up to your potential? Most people immediately say no. Are you doing anything to live up to your potential? Some people will answer, I don't have time, Rabbi, to think about it. I'm so busy at work, I don't have time to think about my potential. I'm trying to make money, I'm trying to be successful, I'm trying to do some good things, but I don't have the luxury to just sit around and actualize my potential. Many people will say, you know what, after life starts wearing you down, you become more resigned, and you just don't have the same idealism that you had when you were younger. So and then you throw into the equation a few shattered dreams and a few disappointments and a few losses, and whether in the area of relationships or other areas. And it does take its toll, where we stop dreaming as much as we once did. Some people would call that realism. I've become realistic. When I was young, I was idealistic because I was naive. Young people, let them be naive. But once you hit life, you realize, lower your expectations, don't get so excited. In many ways, hearing this from people, and I hear it a lot, it really is very, very saddening, because you see people with great strengths, everyone in their own way, have given up on themselves. And when you turn it into let's say an intellectual discussion, so let's move away from the emotional, and say, tell me, you really think that you don't have more potential? You don't have potential to actualize? And when you push it, they say, how could you even make a statement like that? How do you know? Have you plumbed the depths of your own psyche? Are you familiar with what's going on the unconscious level? Do you know what you're capable of? How do you know? Unless you've gone in there, or God told you what's going on inside there, how do you even know what kind of potential you have? Say, how far down the rabbit hole can you go? Who knows? So when you put it that way, most people will say, well, it's true. I probably have a lot more. But the issue here is not so much whether we cerebrally understand it. Emotionally, we give up. So you may have all the strengths you need in the world and many more than you'll ever know. But if you give up or some way give in and feel, let me just, mistapik b'muat is an expression in Hebrew, means I'll suffice with a minimum. Let me just get by. So then all this tremendous potential, this tremendous source of resources, of energy, remain trapped. And if you're not there to tap into it, who's going to tap into it? And why it's even sadder is because the biggest thing in human beings, one of the greatest blessings we have is dignity, pride. I mean in a healthy way. I don't mean ego and arrogance. I mean healthy dignity and pride. So it goes counter to the human dignity and our own pride, sense of pride, to simply say to yourself, you know what? Life has beaten me up and I really can't run this marathon. I can't achieve. And especially if you ask yourself the question, but what happens? Maybe you could, and you've just given up on yourself. So these things, at least from a person like myself, it bothers me. Why does it bother me? Because here you have people born with skills and talents and gifts, and have essentially resigned and thrown in the towel. And that's disturbing, not only just on a personal level, but also on a cosmic level. Because when you study the Kabbalistic texts and the mystical teachings, you realize that we're all musical notes in a large symphony. And when someone doesn't play their song, it affects not just that person, it affects the whole world in some way or another. So, who is it that said, there's a poem called The Voiceless by, who is it? Someone has a Google, you can look up The Voiceless by, was it by Wordsworth? You checking it out? The Voiceless. Maybe Oliver Wendell Holmes. Okay, there you go. I went through my own Google memory banks.
It's quicker than the real thing.
Yeah, that's for sure. And more you, and more real, as opposed to, yeah. So here's a line there, which, I don't know the exact quote, but something of this nature. That most people die with their song still inside them. And I'm committed in my life to make sure that you don't die with your song still inside you. Let's put it this way. So even if you've given up on yourself, here's at least one person you could rest assured, myself, that will not give up. Because I firmly believe that it's one of the most sacred things. Obviously, you may say it's not number one on your priority list. But if you think about it, maybe it should be number one. It's not about the song, it's about you. Because when you wake up in the morning and feel that indispensable sense of self, that you have a song to sing, your voice needs to be heard, it informs and empowers everything you do that day. If on the other hand you wake up where you feel that what you do is negligible, arbitrary, optional, and who really cares, you tell me how invested, how passionate can you really be about your choices and about your decisions and about your life. And I think it's vital that a person have that type of intensity almost, that type of importance. Again, in humility, not an arrogant way, to know that you have that. So in that context, that's what I want to speak about Shavuos in that sense. The empowerment of this day, 3,328 years ago, in our personal lives today. As I said, it has many of the universal messages, it has other lessons, but I'll talk about that. How high can you reach? Okay, so as I mentioned, the younger we are, as we get older, we usually lower the bar simply because of life's experiences and some resignation, and we feel we're aging, or we feel options are not there for us anymore. Well, that, my friends, is what Sinai came to change or to counter. To firstly recognize that we have stores of energy, stores of potential and possibilities that are far beyond we even know. And number two, with methods of learning how to access that. So here's an interesting a medrash. A medrash is one of the oral, bodies of literature, like the Talmud, which focuses more on law, but the medrash is usually more analogies and metaphors, anecdotes. So here's a story. Here's a medrash about Sinai, and it goes like this. It gives an analogy. Interestingly, it chooses the people of Syria and the people of Rome. Now, this medrash was written around 2,000 years ago. Syria and Rome were both empires then. So it says that until Sinai, the people of Syria and the people of Rome were separated by boundaries, and they could not meet. After Sinai, these two came together and they were able to join. And then explains the metaphor by saying that before Sinai, basically, that which was above remained above, and that which was below remained below. And by Sinai, and at Sinai, these two came together. Now, what does above and below mean? So, in simple terms, I'll use Einstein's most famous formula: E equals mc squared. Matter and energy. So, until that point, matter and energy was perceived as two different worlds. Or to use an expression from the book of Ecclesiastes, Ha-shamayim shamayim la-Hashem, heaven belongs to God, and the earth was given to human beings, which is why many people see their lives as a certain compartmentalized duality. There's my material life, and there's my spiritual life. And these are two different worlds. There was even an expression a few centuries ago when Jews were facing the emancipation and enlightenment and coming out of the ghettos. There was the expression coined that a Jew at home and a non-Jew in the street, to have the best of both worlds. Now that option didn't exist 500 years ago because Jews were not allowed in the street. When I say the street, I don't mean walking the street. I mean join the universities, join Western culture, and so on. So that's the classic compartmentalization where, yes, I have God and faith on Saturday, on Shabbos, Yom Kippur, on holidays, but the rest of my life belongs to the material world. Now, of course, in Jewish thought, that is anathema because the concept of Hashem Echad, like we say in Shema, and its concept of unity goes counter to the concept of duality. So yes, though we do have a life in different colors and hues and shapes and forms, but they're all driven by one unifying principle. So we shouldn't mean, so in other words, it's not a divisive duality, it's a diversity. Diversity is very different than divisive. Diversity means we have many different components. Look at the healthy human body. It has 75 trillion cells. Trillion is the number. And it has thousands of systems. And yet it works together like one cohesive unit. So that's not at all compartmentalization. That means it's components of one larger symphony, as I put it before. Whereas duality would mean it's really two separate worlds. So what Sinai did, the Medrash is saying, it bridged the schism between matter and spirit, between material and between body and soul. And that from here on, even when you're eating a meal, physical meal, it's a spiritual experience. And even a spiritual experience has to manifest and be applied and expressed in a material way. So before Sinai, when a mitzvah was done, it was usually more a spiritual thing. And after Sinai, a mitzvah changed the physical world. This is elaborated upon, especially in Hasidic texts, in the context that now, yes, you can take a piece of matter and turn it into spiritual energy when you use it for the right intention. So when you think of it that way, Sinai created a major change. It gives us the ability today to be able to do the same thing, to discover a deeper unity that connects all parts of our life, whether it's our body, physical, material part, or our spiritual parts. That's one thing. The second thing is that in order to achieve such a level of unity, obviously you need a third dimension that brings them together, which is a common rule, a common law. Whenever you have two forces that seemingly are not consistent, you need a third force that joins them together, which introduces a concept that most people are not even aware of, that says the following. Most people think God is spiritual and we live in a material world and our search is for spirituality. That's not true. God is neither spiritual nor material. God is a dimension beyond both. Spirituality, you can say, is a vehicle that helps us reach godliness. That's why we have the concept in Judaism called Kedusha, holiness. Matan Torah, before, right? These days, as the Jews were preparing for Sinai, so there's a statement, Va'atam tili mamlechas kainim v'goy kodesh. God tells Moses to tell the people, you shall be for me, the people. Mamlechas kainim, a kingdom of priests, and a sacred, a holy nation. So how's holiness different than spirituality? How's holiness different than goodness? Being a good person. Because a good person is still in the human domain. So you can have a person who's a selfish or bad person. You can have a person who's a good person. So they moved from, instead of being negative, into a positive force. But it's still human. Holiness is the domain of the divine, of God. It's the domain of the eternal. Because being a good person doesn't necessarily turn you into an immortal person. It takes a mortal person and turns it into a good person. And holiness turns the mortal into immortality, a taste of eternity. And this is a key element in Jewish thought. When you look at the Bible, going back to the verse I said earlier, it's not just all people are created equal, but all people are created in the divine image. See, this the founding fathers did not put in the Declaration of Independence. They said we're created equal, and therefore we all have inalienable rights. But the Torah goes one step further. It says we are actually created in the divine image. And that changes everything. That means that you have a piece of God inside of you. And as such, nothing can stop you from achieving the greatest, scaling the greatest heights. Because it's not just about being immortal. If it was being a human mortal, at the end of the day, as I said before, as we get older, we get tired, we're exhausted, we're resigned, or whatever it is that has affected us. But if you indeed have pulsating inside of you a heartbeat that is divine, then you have something that is immortal and eternal. And this is what Jews always believed in the human being. That's why it wasn't enough just to be good people. We had to be holy people. And holiness lasts forever because it's not man-made. Goodness can be man-made. You could have a person who's an ethical person, a moral person, and gets all the honor for that and all the commendations. But being a holy person, like we say, we read a few chapters back in Leviticus, in Kedoshim, it says, Kedoshim tiyu, you shall be holy. Why? Kodeshani, because I'm holy. Who's I? God. So holiness is a far different word. And what is holiness? Holiness means you're going and transcending the human. A human being is becoming more than human. Sometimes you hear the expression, right? To err is human, forgiveness is divine. That's an example. Right? So we all make, is that the expression? I think something like that, right? So we all make mistakes. But to forgive, if you think about it, why would I forgive? You did something to me, you hurt me. So you'd think, okay, I may not be vengeful, but why would I forgive? Hurt is hurt. Because you're able to transcend even your natural instincts. So when we do something that's beyond our capacity, then we're entering into the domain of the divine. And the key thing to remember, and that's what Shavuos teaches us, that you have to believe that you have that element in yourself. You must believe that, because without that, you're basically writing off so much of your capacity and potential. The capacity to know that you have that element that is divine and therefore in a way infinite. This doesn't mean we're suddenly angels, or doesn't mean we can jump up and we can go beyond and transcend nature itself, but we can transcend the human nature. And let's just use this, let's define it even further. I always like this example because I remember when it happened with me, it was a very interesting, I don't know if it was epiphany, but it was an awareness. So being as a good city boy from New York, so in New York we don't really see much nature, except the little amount that the humans left us see, a tree here and there coming out of the concrete, a Central Park that was like given permission to be where it is and not cross the boundary. In Brooklyn we have Prospect Park, etc. And then we have a few natural creatures too. We have pigeons, we have cats and dogs, the occasional rodent, the squirrels. What else can we identify? I mean, the list is pretty short, right? Okay, fine. So I'm once driving up to the mountains, and I see something I always used to read about, but I never saw one. A cow. Cows don't roam in the streets here. In Calcutta they do. And other places in the east, Far East. But here they don't roam. So I'm watching this cow. I remember when I was younger, and I decided I want to observe the cow. And cows, as you know, are very mellow, calm. I grew up, thank God, in a home. My father was a very calm person, and there's not too much yelling going on in my house. Not too much, I think not at all. But I know homes that are not that way. They're very volatile, warlike zones. But a cow is a very calm creature. You're never seeing it, unless maybe it's threatened or threatening the young. So here's these cows grazing in the meadows in these fields. And I developed this, I guess therapeutic thought. These cows, they don't go to therapy. They don't have any neurosis. They're not anxious. They're not like, what are we doing today? They know what their role is. They wake up, they feed their young, they breed, take care of their young. And that's the cycle. It's maybe 5-10 items on their entire to-do list, their entire lifetimes. So there's a concept that some philosophers have written that some humans aspire to. It's called animal bliss. Have you ever aspired for animal bliss? Animal bliss means absolutely no concerns, the calm of an animal. I should add as a footnote, and this is true, that animals can become neurotic based on human owners. As a matter of fact, I remember a couple coming to this class, and they didn't have children, but they had a few dogs and cats. And they told me that one day they had to leave early because they had to take one of the dogs to the veterinarian. But not just to the vet, this was actually an animal therapist. And I'm saying, why do you need to take the therapist? They say, because the dog is exhibiting signs of anxiety and is acting out. So I asked them later, what happened? I already guessed what happened. So they said, the doctor told them that the dog is picking up their anxiety, and they're a little more calmer at home. The dog will also calm down. So it reminded me of what it says in the Torah, that when the Mabul, the flood, came, it didn't just destroy humans that were cruel and wicked and corrupt, but also destroyed the animals, except the fish. So why the animals? They didn't do anything wrong, but they did, because once humans screw up, corrupt, it also corrupts the animal kingdom. So I guess that's a certain element. But that's just a footnote. But left on their own accord, animals do not waver from the script, from the clockwork that they were created to do. When they don't waver means they don't subtract, but they also don't add. It's only the human being is the weird creature, which evolutionists say is just a mutation and a strange twist of evolution that shouldn't happen this way. We should have also just been like bacteria that are calm and peaceful, and we evolved, or maybe our minds grew too quickly. That's what evolutionists say. But the Torah will say that human being is the only one gifted with something that's different than anyone else has, and that is the ability to both either what's the word I want to say? Not cooperate with the script for which we were written, or we can also improve the universe around us. And of course, it's interdependent. So we do not follow a script, and we have the ability to either mess it up or to make it far better. So take an example. I mentioned this example a number of times. It's only the human being that's created this concept called a couch potato. You've heard of a couch potato? It's called someone who does nothing. You know? And some people actually see it as an art. They've mastered the art of doing nothing. They tell this joke about this old Jew who's sitting on a bench. He's very depressed. Another Jew comes over and says to him, "What are you so depressed about, Yankel?" He says, "My wife is very upset at me today." "What's new? She's been upset at you for 60 years. He said, no, this is extraordinary, something special. What happened? This morning she went to work. She asked me, "What am I doing today?" And I told her nothing. She said, "But you said that yesterday." And I told her I wasn't finished. Finished doing nothing, that is. So we humans have mastered the art called, everything in life is mobile. Everything moves. Your heart beats, a healthy heart and breath, approximately 18 times every minute. God forbid should it stop, life ends. Nothing on this earth is not dynamic. Everything is mobile. Everything is transitioning. Everything is going through a metamorphosis from one state to another state. It's only we who think it's mastered the art of doing nothing. That's that with extreme. Or the other extreme. We can improve the world and make it a far better place, as we've seen humans have done, through technology and science and medicine and so on. So, an analogy is given for it. I'll first start with a story that Tzemach Tzedek was the third Chabad Rebbe, was once playing with other children. They were climbing a ladder, and he was the only one that climbed to the top of the ladder. The other children were afraid to climb up to the top. So later his grandfather, who was the famous Baal HaTanya, Rabbi Shneur Zalman of Liadi, and asked the little boy, his grandson, who he took care of because he lost his mother at a young age. It's a long story. Why were you the only one that had the courage to climb to the top of the ladder and all the others were afraid? So he said, Zayda, which is grandpa, very simple. When the other children were climbing, they kept looking down. So they saw how high they were afraid to climb higher. And when I was climbing, I kept looking up. So I saw how low I was, so it motivated me to climb higher. Now you can imagine this boy grew up to be himself a giant. Butzim mekat v'yadir, they say, you know. From young age, you could already tell what a person will be. But this is a tremendous story because it captures the theme I'm addressing, and that is, what are we capable of? And it comes down to what we believe in ourselves to be or not to be. So the looking up and looking down is interesting because when you are with people, for example, that are less accomplished than you, most often it probably brings you down a notch or two. Because they're less accomplished, so you say to yourself, hey, look how much I've accomplished compared to them. It's not exactly a motivating element. But if you're around people who have accomplished more than you, then there's a certain kinah safrim tar b'chachma, which means in Hebrew, a healthy competition that motivates you. You look up, you see how much more there is to go, that's a motivating element. So one of the Hasidic Rebbes once said that the behema had kemels the himmel nish gesehen. An animal never saw heaven. Animals, their physiology is they walk on all four. Now just to make a disclaimer, because people ask me always, what about the kangaroo, what about the giraffe? Well, first of all, giraffe also walks on all four, it just has a long neck. So its head is high up, but it's still on all four. And even animals could technically look up, but their physiology is not one turn to look up. They look down. Ruach ha-behema yeredes lamata. The spirit of an animal, the breath of an animal breathes downward. Humans are the only ones that walk upright, which means our head are the highest part, not equal to the body. This isn't just a physiological difference, it's because we have a psychological and spiritual difference. Animals were not meant to look up. There's no concept. They don't need to constantly aspire to greater growth. Animals are very happy to live in the same habitats they lived 100 years ago, 1,000 years ago. It's humans, sumarim enechem, raise their eyes to heaven, and they see something and they're curious. What's out there? We spend billions of dollars just to satisfy one thing called curiosity. NASA. What is out there? Is the moon made out of cheese? Are there Martians? Curiosity. It wasn't for business purposes, it wasn't for profit. It's been turned into commercials and monetization and so on. But it was simply curiosity, because humans look up, and when we look up, we want to know what's there. And that is one of the features of the soul. Ner Hashem, Nishmas Adam, the soul of a human being is like a flame. Think of a flame. The only physical object that defies gravity, that we can see with our eyes, is a flame. It's always upward. You turn a candle down, the flame will still go up. Because a flame is God gave us a blessing of a flame, which is why flames, one of the reasons why flames play such a prominent role in Jewish life, lighting Shabbos candles and holiday candles and Hanukkah. The menorah in the temple is not just another vessel, it's the special chapter that talks about Leischos HaNeres and Atatetz Tzav and the Ner Tamid, talks about the flames, the lights. Even, God forbid, a loss, Yizkor candle, Neshama relates to flame. And it gives us a physical thing to look at, that you can say, this is what your soul looks like. You know what it does? It defies gravity. Everything in life tugs us down with the gravitational pull, our physical needs, our weight, both physically and metaphorically, and so on. But there's one voice or one force inside of us that always looks up. And as it looks up, it helps us think of what is possible. And when you know when you think of what's possible, you want it. However, we have the choice. We can ignore that voice, or we can, even worse, abuse it and use it for all kinds of negative stuff. The worst is possible is when that voice becomes that we lose awareness and consciousness of that voice, and we become basically survivors, or even worse, victim of circumstances. You know, what can I do? What people say. That's my life. These are my parents. This is the family I grew up with. This is the community. I have no real choices. That's a person who's lost touch with their soul. That's the voice of resignation. That means you don't even believe that you have that infinity inside of you. So when we speak about a soul, it's not just a nice idea, there's a soul inside of you that gives you life. It means you have a piece of eternity, a piece of God, a piece of divine within you. And that was affirmed. It was the way we were created in the beginning of time, when God created the human being in the divine image. But when did it become a viable and actionable plan? That happened at Sinai. Because Sinai gave us now the power to actualize that soul in the material world. As I said before from the Medrash, because it bridged the schism between matter and spirit, and said, Atam tiyuli mamlechus kainim v'goy kodesh, you're a kingdom of priests, and goy kodesh, you have the ability to be holy. As I said before, not just good, not just ethical, not just a fine person, that's all mortal. Holy, kodeshani, kadeshim tiyu, is eternal. You have ability to have taste of eternity and immortality. Because it's not you. Animals were not given immortality in their spirit. That's not their role. Their role is to play part of the role of the machine of this world, to keep the balance of nature going. Just like the sun rises and the moon and all the celestial bodies, animals, and the same thing vegetable and same thing mineral, play a role, the platform of life. But it's the human who comes in as the special guest that has the ability to transform, to introduce something that's beyond human. So you can't ask an animal, for example, expect an animal to go more than its ability to do so. For example, predators in the wild hunt only when they hunt. When do they hunt? When they need to hunt. They never hunt for pleasure. They don't have what humans have. We go hunting, I like to hunt. You never have a concept of hunt. They hunt because when they're hungry. And when they're not hungry, they won't hunt, no matter what you do. Again, I'm not talking about if humans corrupt them and medicate them or do some crazy stuff with them. They hunt when they need to hunt when they're hungry. We're the only ones that eat even when we're not hungry, as many people can testify to. You know? And we're the only ones that will do things that are not necessary. But it goes both ways. We can do something destructive, but we could also do something beyond our nature. So there's a Talmud in Menachos that says the following, that a person, in the custom was during the times of the Talmud that the students in the academies would study their teachings 100 times. They were required to review, and this was the custom, 100 times. Anything they studied, they reviewed 100 times. Which also explains why they remember it all, Baal Peh, Torah Sheba'al Peh, because they reviewed it again and again. So the Talmud says the following. Now, a person who studies 100 times, what do you call a person like that? It's pretty admirable, right? Nevertheless, the Talmud, which has higher expectations, says you can't call this person a servant of God, because they didn't do any service. They didn't work at it. The word avodah in Hebrew comes from effort, exertion. There's no exertion. It's the custom of the land. Everyone does it. So you can't call it lo yavodah, it's called, like you didn't serve. Not that it isn't valuable and important, but to say a serve, no. Then the Talmud says, but if you add 1 to the 100 and you review it 101 times, that 1, which can only be after you have the 100, obviously, is qualitatively worth more than the first 100, because you've gone beyond your natural routine. In chapter 15 in Tanya is a whole powerful chapter just on this theme, the idea of how we can go beyond. That's why I said before, so to err is human, but to forgive is divine. Because there are many things where, there's an expression in the Torah, you have a concept of ma'aver al midaisov. That means somebody who, even though they legitimately had a right to be upset or to react a certain way, like Joseph, for example, the classic example, Joseph had all the right, after 22 years being separated and sold, almost killed and then sold into slavery, he had all the right to what? To be extremely angry at his brothers. He did nothing wrong. Definitely not on that level. To create so much misery for him. And yet, the Zohar talks about the reward that the Jewish people get for his act. That when he finally reveals himself to his brothers in Vayigash, chapter Vayigash, he can't control himself anymore. He reveals himself, and they're so embarrassed. They suddenly see their brother, what they did to him. And now he's the viceroy, the second in command, and he tells them, and not being cute and not putting it on sincerely, he tells them, you didn't do this to me. It is God that sent me here in order for me to be able to sustain you and our father and our people. So he had the foresight, the ability to transcend everything he suffered, the prison, the accusations, everything he went through, and remember that it's God that sent me here. Now, the tribes had their responsibility for it, but Joseph did not allow himself to become a victim of what they did. He rose to the occasion. It's called someone that looked over. This is only a human being. Only a divine power allows someone, because it seems natural. We're human beings. You did something to me legitimately wrong. I should be upset. Nothing wrong with being upset. Whether you have to act on it or feel vengeance, maybe not. But being upset. So the capacity for a person to transcend their circumstances comes from a divine place. And that's the soul at work. So for us to not have access or not be aware of this power in us is more than a tragedy. You can live your whole life and not know how much power you have. Not know that you have the power to really move mountains, to change heaven and earth. And that's what Sinai taught on a personal level, that we have the capacity to transform. And that doesn't mean that life is always perfect. It means no matter what happens to you, you have always a divine power that's not bound by and subject to the laws of nature. Again, this is not meant to be in a ridiculous way where, suddenly you can jump up 50 stories or fly in this. We're not talking about childish magic. We're talking about the capacity of the human spirit not to be affected by circumstances. Now, of course, the big question is very good. That's all fine and good, but how do you access it? So we'll talk about that. But the first step is you have to believe and know that it's there. So on a very personal level, someone will ask, what did Sinai do to change the world? So collectively, I spoke about that earlier at the beginning of the class, the freedoms, civilization, and so on. But on a personal level, it taught us, and not just taught us, it gave us the power to, in this material world, to be divine. Now, when Moses was up on Mount Sinai, the Talmud, there's a whole section in the tractate in Shabbos, talks about the events around Sinai. So one of the stories it tells there is that when Moses was up in heaven, so to speak, the angels came to God with a complaint and said, why are you giving this chem de gnuza, this hidden treasure of yours, which was 26 generations, you didn't give it to the human race? Why are you giving it to these lowly, inferior human beings? Now, just for the record, the angels always have these type of complaints, and God never listens to them for some reason. You hear it all the time. God consults with them and then doesn't do what they say, which is another discussion. But so Moses is there, so God says to Moses, respond to them. The Torah is a divine blueprint. It's a spiritual book expressing divine will and divine intelligence and God's master plan. So why are you giving to these inferior human beings? So God says to Moses, respond. And Moses begins to tremble. He's afraid to respond. So God said, hold on to my throne. And Moses, like a good advocate, what does he do? He opens up a Torah, a good lawyer, and let's look into the 10 Commandments. It says, I, your God, have taken you who took you out of Egypt. So he says to the angels, were you in Egypt? And then he says, honor your parents. Do you have parents to honor? Do not steal. Do not murder. Do you have any temptation to steal or murder? So basically the book is not relevant to you. And of course he prevailed, and with that the Torah was given to the people. Now, many commentaries talk about this Talmud. What does it mean? What's going on here exactly? First of all, it seems so basic. Why was he concerned with answering? It's very simple. The Torah does talk about things on earth here. What are the angels thinking? What exactly was the discussion here? So there are many explanations. I'm going to refer to one that's relevant to our discussion here. The real question is, going back to what I said before, is there a dichotomy between heaven and earth? Because you can say, Shamayim LaHashem, heaven belongs to God, and and earth was given to human beings. So the angels are saying very simple. The Torah is a divine book. It doesn't belong on earth. Earth is where the farmers and the technicians and people of the mortals go to the world, and they follow the guidelines they're taught to follow. So we'll give them the basic rules they need. They don't need this whole Torah with all its depth and all its soul and spirit. The Torah has many dimensions. Of course the angels understood how are humans supposed to exactly know what to do if they don't have laws. So they couldn't have been saying, don't give the Torah to the people, obviously. But you can give a Torah that's just a basic to-do guide. You know, like you come home with a machine, this is what you do, this is what you don't do. But the layers and layers of the reasoning behind it, the engineering, the soul dimension, all the inner workings, why are you giving that to the human beings? They're mere human beings, they're mortals. This does not belong there. This belongs by the experts in heaven. We are the experts on the divine and on the soul. Now, this would be fine and good if there was indeed such a dichotomy and such a duality. Moses demonstrates by taking the 10 Commandments that the Torah, not just that it talks about matters down below, but its core and essence is Torah leba shamayim. Torah is not in heaven. And all the heavenly and spiritual meanings of Torah, where do they really manifest, is down here on earth. And that's what he really demonstrated. That we not just that we have laws of what to do, moral laws or ethical laws or basic laws, but no, we have the divine power to transform the world with these laws. It's a very different statement. For example, look at the story of Hanukkah. So it says the Greeks were not interested in killing the Jews. Haman and Purim was a physical genocide like Hitler. Yamach Shema. But The Greeks were not interested. Nowhere did they want to kill the Jews. There was a war because the Jews defended themselves against the desecration. They wanted one thing we say in the prayer, Lashkicham teirasecha, la'aviram chuki ritzanecha. Let me translate. Lashkicham teirasecha, to make us forget your Torah. So the emphasis is teirasecha. The Greeks were a very intelligent nation. They had philosophy, they had poetry, they had medicine, they had art, astronomy. Even Maimonides writes how we learn things from the Greeks in that regard. But that's human wisdom. It's the human effort to understand things. Teirasecha, that it's your Torah. When we say, we don't just learn Torah. We make a blessing, Baruch Hu b'Torah Tchila, we make a blessing. Thank you, God, for giving us the Torah. Why are you throwing a divine element? Take the philosophies, the morality, the ethics, all fine. Why are you making something human into something divine? Where's the whole? Why holiness? What do you need holiness? Why are you sanctifying it? Not, no problem. Fulfill God's will in morals. That you sanctified us with these mitzvahs. Why are you adding this dimension of sanctity? Now, what's the answer to the question? The answer is, firstly, two answers. Like they say, Kra lamali svari, svari lamali kraya, which means both a logical answer and an answer from the scriptures. From the scriptures, it's very clear. That's what God wants. He wants us not just to be human, He wants us to be divine. He created us in the divine image, said, be holy. I don't just want you to be the best you can be as a person. I want you to be more than a person. I don't want you just to study 100 times. I want you to go beyond your capacity and nature, because you have a part of me that's not bound by any laws of nature. And from a logical point of view, it also makes a lot of sense, because why limit? Why limit ourselves? And on a deeper level, you can't transform the world. What do the scientists say? It was Einstein or others that said, you can't change a system from within the system. If we were just humanly ethical people or humanly intelligent people, then you never can change the system, because you're just a product of the system. But when you bring in a force of an immortal, eternal force of the divine, you have the power to transform. And transformation can only come from outside. So a human, a person who's in fetters cannot free themselves. If we were just humans and mortals, we would never be able to transform the world. And more importantly, we would never be able to really transcend our natures, because we are a product of nature too. Why are we different than any other force of nature that's subject to its laws? But we have something that is divine. And as such, we have the capacity to go beyond ourselves, not because it's a miracle, but because we have within us something that is beyond ourselves. So besides the fact that we have potential and we have capacities that we may not even imagine, we also have something that's even beyond that, and that is something that's more than human. And Sinai taught us that can be experienced down here on earth. Now remember, the Torah was not taken away from heaven. The angels, the souls, they continue to study Torah, but they don't have the essence of Torah, because they don't transform anything with it. They have the spiritual and the deeper insights that they can either understand or emotionally experience. But transformation is only possible here in this world. So at the end of this day, what it really means for each of us is the following. What are we capable of? If I were able to convey one thing when I speak to people. So most people come to you when they have problems. So the first thing they want is their problem solved. Before you start talking to me about what kinds of heights I can reach, I want to have my problem solved. First let's clean up, and then we'll talk about growing. The truth is that if they knew what kind of potential they had and actualized it, they would have less problems, and it would help them solve the problems. But when we're surrounded by and we're completely consumed by our problems, we can't see anything. You only see things from your narrow point of view, which is why there's actually two ways to solve a problem. One way is to deal with it directly and try to tinker with it and tamper with it and fix it. Another way is to overwhelm somebody with a dose of so much light that the problem is somewhat overshadowed, and a person begins to focus on something much greater and higher, so they have less obsession or being consumed with that issue. I don't know if this is accurate. I heard about it. I always wanted to research it, but maybe you could try to check it out and tell me what you come up with. Someone told me, why do we itch when we have a scratch or a pain? Why do we itch? What's the purpose of itching? So, I didn't confirm this, but if it's true, it substantiates what I just said, and that is we itch because the itch is stronger than the pain. So when the mind, the brain, and its nerves feel a stronger pain, the lesser pain is not felt. That's why we itch. Which, if it's true, it would be something of this nature, that when you stimulate a part of the brain that's stronger than what's being stimulated, let's say, by your anxiety or by something negative, it should take away your mind and not allow it to focus on the lesser pain. Now, think of it this way. If instead of one greater pain being than a lesser pain, how about if you were able to stimulate the pleasure principle in a person that's more powerful than the pain principle? Which probably you'd need a lot more. As I mentioned the week, I mentioned that they say that if you lose $1,000 and you gain $1,000, they don't balance each other out. The pain of losing $1,000 is always more painful than the joy of gaining. You have to win around $4,000 to counter the loss of 1,000, whether it's due to our sense of entitlement or whatever it may be. So if you were able to stimulate in a person the will and the drive for something to succeed in, that would be more powerful than what is depressing or causing them anxiety, you hypothetically can solve the problem in a different way. Now, of course, when a person's consumed with whatever they're consumed with, they don't want to hear anything. So there's two ways, in other words, to fight darkness. One is to try to fight the darkness and tackle it. Another is to bring more light in, and that, on a psychological level, makes it easier than to just dispel the darkness because you're focusing on positive things. So that's one type of way of applying a Matan Torah approach to our lives. Because look, the Jews had just been 210 years in exile, in a very deep, oppressive situation, to the point that many even argue, especially Mar Nevuchim, Maimonides and others, that psychologically we're a broken people. Some even argue they had like slave mentality, and there were Jews that wanted to go back to Egypt. But on the other hand, you find statements in the Torah that doesn't seem to indicate that. Atam Tili Mamlechas Kainim Goy Kodesh. It's only 49 days, less than 45 days, 44 days, 46 days since they left Egypt. And you're now saying a kingdom of priests, Goy Kodesh, a holy nation. And you see statements in the Torah that seem to expect from the Jews a lot more, but there 49 days ago they were literally in a Holocaust. And it says in some places that had they waited one more moment, one more moment, they would never have been able to free themselves from the pollution of Egypt, because it was so intense. And yet suddenly you find that they're able to stand at Sinai, receive the greatest revelation of all. It's true that 39 days later they built a golden calf, which is part of the result of it. But nevertheless, they did experience such great heights and all the power of Sinai. The answer is because no matter how low a person falls, the soul is not impacted by it. And Sinai was saying that no matter what you've gone through, there's a way to lift you up to another place, a completely different dimension, because you are, at the end of the day, a divine entity. And that's why you find, like a Viktor Frankl developing logotherapy and man's search for meaning, confirmed in the Holocaust, that even though the Holocaust was maybe the worst of all of human events, disasters in human history, Jewish history for sure, and nevertheless you see people rising from the ashes with a dignity, with an aplomb, with a a pride. That doesn't mean they weren't broken. It doesn't mean that they didn't suffer. They lost terrible losses. Entire families wiped out. But one thing was not wiped out, and that is the faith. You hear from people, and I've heard this from eyewitnesses, who were in the DP camps in 1945, the first Yom Kippur, after they came out, after the liberation. So there was a DP camp, I forgot the name of it, but I heard from one of the people who was there. He's passed away 2 years ago, Label Zisman, he tells me, the Klausenberger Rebbe was there. And he himself lost his wife and an entire family wiped out. And you're dealing with hundreds, if not, there was, he said, over 1,500 people came Yom Kippur to daven, Kol Nidre. Orphans, little boys and girls, husbands without wives, wives without husbands. People lost children. Everybody was broken. There was not one person who was not suffering because they all came out of the camps. Nobody came out intact. And those that survived in many ways felt even more guilt than those that didn't. So you can imagine the scene. He says the tears that were pouring, they're crying. But there were moments when the children who had no parents came to the Klezmer, asked for a blessing, and how he tore off his own kittel. I mean, it's all dramatic. I wrote it up once in detail. But you see both sides. You see unbelievable suffering, which can break your heart, but you also see a spark. And I'm not trying to be poetic here. A spark that, in a way, did not give up. And no one knew yet what's going to happen. But they all, in some way or other, completely mysterious to human condition. Unpredictable. Because you'd think a nation like that, after what it went through, would die. Would lie down and die. And a spark. And something was able to be rebuilt. And though the anguish remains, and those that suffered, but they had another force inside of them. It's not you can't explain it in human terms, because any mathematical equation, any empirical, evidence and prediction would not predict such a result. All the predictions then were that by the year 2000 there'd be no Jews left on earth, and they made much more sense. All the actuaries and all the mathematicians had it all figured out. Go by the numbers. It wasn't just, you talk about life expectancy, like they say a birth rate of 2.8. By 50 years, will not be able to replace. Here was less than 2. Here, 6 million out of 18 million were killed. Forget about families. They were all killed. A third of a nation. A third. Imagine a third of the earth. A third of 7 billion, God forbid. You're talking about an astronomical number. Obviously, exponentially. So, it's the testimony to a spirit that is not purely human. That's what it comes down to. I'm not going into a philosophical debate whether this can be proven or not proven. To me, it's enough experiential proof. When I see certain things, can't deny it. My father grew up in the Soviet Union under Stalin. I'm not going to start comparing evil people, but he was the same league as Hitler. Just did it a different way, not as methodical perhaps. And fear, 24/7 fear, is what permeated their lives. Now, I heard it from my father. I wasn't there. I can't say I experienced it, but I heard it from an eyewitness, a living witness. The only way to explain is that there's that spirit. Now, as I said, oddly and ironically, sadly, today, because we don't have all that pressure and all that oppression, you don't see that spirit so. Because we spend our time wasting it, really. We waste our time most of it. However, comes Shavuos and Matan Torah and reminds us of who we really are, who you are, who I am, and our capacity. What greater commitment can there be, even from a purely selfish point of view, you can say, is living up to your possibilities. So it really requires 2 steps. One is to be aware and firmly believe and be aware of what you're capable of, including both on the human potential and the divine potential I'm discussing, and secondly, acting on it. But it's very hard to act without some awareness, because if you don't even know the horizon looks like, you won't even climb. So this comes down to a simple solution. You must commit to studying about your soul and plumbing its depths and recognizing that what you know about yourself and what you know about life is very, very, very minuscule. The tip of the iceberg. Because if someone say, any intelligent person, tell me, how much do you know about yourself? All you can answer is, I know what I know from my experience, what I've read, what I feel, and that's that. So you said it right there. It's all about you and what you've experienced. But if you haven't climbed the mountain or you haven't dug deeper, obviously you're not going to know. As you study especially the Pnimiyus HaTorah, you study the spiritual, the esoteric dimension, Kabbalistic, Hasidic dimension, you know what the bottom line what you learn is? You learn about the deeper secrets that you carry inside of you, the deeper power you have. And it's inevitable that when you become aware of it, it becomes more accessible. That's how it is. To use a mundane example, whether it's musical geniuses or talents or other artistic prodigies, or for that matter, athletic ones, or in acting, or in the arts, what do you see? One common denominator. That each one of these individuals had someone, a parent, or a mentor, or a coach, that believed in them, that recognized the skill, and was persistently committed to getting that skill to emerge, with all the resistance of that individual. Because it's difficult. It's difficult to discipline yourself and sit with an instrument or with a racket or with or whatever other skill it is that a person has. And when you have that, what happens is the person themselves begin to become aware of what they're capable of. They have an outside person who's reinforces and helps affirm and validate that confidence. And when we do have moments of doubt, which we all have, they continue to push that they believe in you. Even though some people, of course, can generate it from within, but it's always stronger when you have another force outside of you. The greatest talents you'll see, most of them were discovered or definitely cultivated by another force. So we have to apply the same principle to our own spiritual capacities, whatever it is that we're good at. And everybody has something they're good at, or even great at. I don't say everybody's a prodigy, but everybody has certain prodigious, is that how you pronounce it? Prodigious? Whatever. You get the idea. I know it's spelled Prodigious. Probably prodigious. Abilities. So you need to learn about them, and you need someone that can help you uncover them and embrace them. And Sinai was the so-called open the door. In a way, when you say, where does heaven kiss earth? Where does heaven meet earth? As I said, they're two different worlds. And metaphorically, they can also be seen as spirit and matter, your inner capacities and your outer reality, what you do and who you are, form and function, body and soul. The list goes on. Where do they meet? So at Sinai they met. It says God came down on the mountain and Moses went up. They met. Where do they meet? You know where they meet? At your doorstep. You have the key. Right now, right here, and especially as we go into the holiday. And we know a holiday is not just a commemorating past events. It actually opens up the same window or door of opportunity that opened up 3,328 years ago. We recreate the Shavuos, this Saturday night, and Sunday and Monday. Especially when we read the Ten Commandments or listen to them in the synagogue on the first day of Shavuos, will be Sunday morning. So it says in Medrash, in the Psikta, and the Harakeach, halachic authorities cite it, that it's as if it's considered as if you're standing at Sinai and recreating the Sinai experience. So whatever happened then happens now. So even though we have this power all year round, but especially on this anniversary, you have even more power. So if you commit yourself, and you open up your heart and soul, and you really put aside all your, at least for a few hours or a day or two, put aside all your self-doubts and all your history and all you think is not giving you a chance because whatever, not me, I'm not blessed, etc. I'm doomed, I'm cursed, whatever it may be. Put aside all your, as Abraham was told, all the predictions and the fortune telling, and have like a clean slate. So you have an opening that opens up, that awakens and generates or stimulates the divine within you, the divine soul within you that has literally unlimited potential. But unlimited potential, your limited potential. It's not mine, it's not someone else's. And if you make that commitment to learn about this soul, now one of the reasons I wrote the book on the counting of the Omer, so it was also because people in the class here wanted to know what those 49 days are about. But it's another thing. It's plumbing into the anatomy, dissecting the anatomy of your soul. Because just like the body has parts, and an X-ray of the body or a CAT scan or other scans will give you a picture of your body, what does your soul look like? So it looks like something. It has spiritual faculties. It has attributes. You have chesed in your soul, kindness. You have discipline, gvura, and you have compassion, and you have ambition, fortitude. You have yielding or humility, and you have bonding, and you have dignity. These are real forces. They're just not tangible, and you can't touch them. But they define your personality. And every soul has those 7 emotions and 3 intellectual capacities. We're not even counting now chokhmah stima, the superconscious faculties. And they are what make you tick. That's what makes you tick. And they are the forces, the powers that define who you are. Now, what distinguishes one from another, just like we have arms and legs, and we have eyes and ears and a mind, what distinguishes one mind from another is our minds are different. So the same thing is with our emotional attributes. Your chesed and my chesed are not the same. Love is a very big word, everybody uses it, but 2 people don't love the same way. I'm talking about even healthy love, because different focus. Some people, for example, it comes very easy for them to give, and they don't know when to stop giving. Other people are very, very stingy in what they give, and they're very good at discipline, but they're not good at letting it flow. That's just a general example. And even in the flow itself, there's different ways. So when you really want to understand yourself, you need to understand your components. Just like if you wanted to have a good diagnosis of your physical condition, a physical checkup, so you can figure out what your bones are like and what muscles and where there's strength and what's weak and what needs supplements and vitamins and so on. The same things on a personality and spiritual level. A soul is not just a general term. It's made up of parts. And those parts, there are areas where you're strong in, there are areas you're not strong in. How can you know yourself if you don't know your soul? It always it stupefies me to imagine people want to know themselves. Everybody wants to know themselves. And yet, how many people really spend the time to try to find out what they're made of? You go figure. It's part of the human insanity that we always see. That's how it is. We are strange creatures. So in the final analysis here, Sinai opened up a door that we are not just we're just good people, we can be holy people. And holiness is of the divine. It's made of divine ingredients, which include eternity, immortality, things that are forever. The exact antithesis to the things we worship most, which is instant gratification, everything that dies very quickly, or not so quickly, but it dies. The things people worship most today are what's called in the Talmud are chayashah, temporary things. And things that have lasting or eternal impact are not very much valued. Even though on paper everyone will say, hey, but we know today if you're offered $100,000 over the next 10 years or $10,000 right now, what do most people choose? Even on a money level. Because we think for now, we have myopic vision, and that's why it's so difficult to plan ahead. Things are working now, why should I worry? Very few people have the discipline or with a wise chacham reyes hanela, to be able to see ahead, and not only see ahead but act on it. So, in that sense, in addition to what I discussed earlier, the global and universal contribution of Sinai 3,328 years ago, there's the personal. And the personal is how high you can reach. And the answer is much higher than you'll ever imagine. And to be able to, and to continue to focus on saying, you know what, before I start looking at what I can reach, I got to get over the little problems I have. You could end up spending the rest of your life fighting your little problems and never knowing what you're capable of. You'll see again, when you look at athletes or musicians or other the arts, you'll always see the good coaches. Don't let anyone ever get focused with a particular issue. You always focus on what you're capable of and acting on it. Because if you start obsessing, like the medical student that starts studying every problem that can go, every time you cough, you think it's another disease. You have to be able to not allow the details to stop the forward movement and thrust of the driving. And you'll see this, whether it's people who invented like the airplane, the Wright brothers, or other things, never allowed a hiccup or a detail to stop the progress. Obviously, you learn from it, but if you start getting consumed by that, which is what most people say, I tell people, if you had a little more soulfulness in your life, you'd have less problems. They say, first let me get rid of my problems, then I'll get soulfulness. You understand? So what do you do then? And we say to them, well, if you had the soulfulness, that would help you get rid of the problem. They don't see it as related. Obviously not. That's like someone who's saying, listen, I have a cough or I have a pain, so don't tell me what to do something to get rid of the pain. First get rid of the pain, then tell me what to do to get rid of the pain. That's the illogic of it all. So Sinai, in that sense, on a personal level, as we recreate it in the next few days on the holiday, opens up that force of our ability to, yes, reach heaven and beyond, or better put heaven on earth, and even higher than heaven. And the most important thing is know you have it right inside your heart and soul right now. You don't need no one to give it to you. You don't need to buy it. One of the reasons the Torah was given in the wilderness, which is an odd thing, if it's such a special gift and treasure, would you give a treasure or a gift to somebody in a 120-degree desert? You take them to a beautiful restaurant or another place of nice ambiance. You give them the gift, right? Why did God schlep them to a wilderness? We don't know the temperature. It wasn't recorded, but usually that time in the morning in that area, it's not very comfortable. And give them the Torah there. So one of the answers the Medrash gives is a fascinating answer. It says because the Midbar, a wilderness, is a mokem hefker. It's no man's land. And no man's land means, from a legal point of view, nobody can lay claim to it. If the Torah was given in Jerusalem, rest assured that Jerusalemites till this day would be asking for royalties every time we have a class, a Torah class. The Woody Allen's joke where the guy comes to the rabbi, says, I hear the Torah has all the answers to life's secrets. Sure. Can you teach it to me? Of course. How much will it cost? He said, how could I charge you? God didn't charge us for the Torah at Sinai. Moses didn't charge us. How could I charge? So the guy is doubly impressed. He's going to get the secrets of life for free. Well, they sit down, they open up a Torah, it's all in Hebrew. So the rabbi says, Hebrew lessons will be $20,000, This is, of course, not the point. So God decided to give the Torah in a wilderness where there's no one that can lay claim and say this is ours, to teach us the secret of truth. Whenever you hear a government establishes a bureau of truth and information, you can rest assured it's neither true nor information. Who established that? The Nazis, the communists, every fascist regime. You got to control the minds, the media, the airwaves. So the Torah was given a place we have no control. Truth is not owned by anybody. It's not owned by a teacher. It's not owned by rabbis. It's not owned by anyone. It's a divine force, just like life. Even though your parents were the ones that are the messengers and the so-called caretakers of your soul, but they didn't create your soul. It was God that gave you life. It's God's life that they have the honor to cultivate and protect and so on. So the same thing is with truth. It doesn't belong to anyone. It's right now sitting inside of you. And maybe for that reason, God made sure that every child in its mother's womb studies the entire Torah. The entire Torah. And after that, it's all downhill. There's no school, no yeshiva, no cheder that's as good as that classroom. So, in case you had terrible education, or no education, or whatever it is, always know that you had 9 months that things were very good. Now, it's still in our unconscious right now, but it's there embedded inside of you, and now the question is accessing it. So when we study Torah now, on a conscious level, you're accessing the truths that are inside your DNA. And not just accessing it, but then it allows you to also understand your potential, your ability. Unfortunately, Judaism and Torah have been presented in such a parochial and narrow way today that most people don't see it as the capacity to reach the infinite, the capacity to reach what's called Ein Sof, the capacity to meet heaven, to bridge heaven and earth. It's been turned into a body of rituals and traditions driven by fear and guilt. Everything but what it's really meant to be, which is opening your mind, opening up horizons, becoming the best you can be, not just some type of a puppet or machine that follows orders. Yes, there are parts of the Torah, obviously, that require discipline, require obedience, require listening to the rules, obviously, like anything. But it's about playing music and about accessing that which is beyond the infinite. That is less focused on, or maybe not focused on at all for many. But as I said, the good news is we all had a good head start. We were, as we were submerged in the embryonic fluids, just like the world, the universe was submerged once in the waters of knowledge, 9 months, we were submerged in a higher wisdom. And that's part of who we are. And that's why when you study it properly, Torah, and you hear it properly, what happens is it resonates. It's like resonating truths, like saying, I heard that song somewhere before, can't quite place it. That's what reliving Sinai is about. So I want to wish you all a very joyous and internalized and meaningful Shavuos. There are plenty of stuff you can read, and I'm sure if you look online on our site, meaningfullife.com, I've written a lot of articles about the Sinai experience that develops these themes further. You can check it out. It's all there. And anything that you can read or internalize that resonates in this context, obviously, are the resources and tools that can help you develop these methodologies. You know, in a short class like this, relatively short, you can't cover everything, but I hope we gave some taste, some appetizer. They always like to say, if you can't get somebody's attention in 10 seconds, you're not going to get it in 10 minutes. You know, even though, so this was more than 10 seconds, but I hope the amount of time that I spent here does give you some, intrigues you to want to pursue further, and I'll try to understand what your soul is like, what you're like, what makes you tick, and above all, what you're capable of. Because without that, frankly, like you could live your life, as I said before, from Oliver Wendell Holmes in the Voiceless poem. Without that, you can end up dying with your song inside of you. One of the saddest things you can ever imagine. To die with your song inside of you, meaning not actualizing what you're capable of. So not just for yourself, also for your loved ones and family and friends, community, and for the world itself. So everyone have a very meaningful Shavuos. I definitely encourage you to go to synagogue if you aren't, or I'm going to say this to everyone listening, both here and online, and hear the 10 Commandments, but hear it with your heart and soul. You know, prepare for it. Don't just do it by rote or mechanically. The more you appreciate what you're doing, the more you will benefit from it. You do things mechanically, you usually have mechanical results, which means really no results. So hopefully everyone will do that, and I will announce that next Wednesday, I will not be here. Next 2 Wednesdays, the class will not be on location. I will record, so I'll be online only because I'm traveling. I'm actually traveling to Israel right after Shavuos. And then next Wednesday, for 2 Wednesdays. But we will resume, that would be, so today is June 8th, 15th, and the 22nd. I won't be here, 29th will be the next time we'll be on location here. And as always, feel free to access me or Meaningful Life Center, anything we can do to help you in your spiritual journey on this earth, bridging heaven and earth. We're here in every possible way. And with that said, everyone have, again, a very good holiday, and a good week, and a good life. Thank you very much. And my good friend has arrived. Very good. Let me just